There are many religions in our world today, and the many gods that go with that. And every religion claims that their God is the real one, the Creator. Some religions carefully avoid this topic, while some others tell us that we are all worshipping the same God, yet they discredit other gods. And there is animosity between the followers of different religions. It is obvious there are conflicting forces behind these religions. So which one of these spirits is the true God, the Creator? And how can we know for sure? Well,
what you have to do is look at the evidence, analyze the evidence, and come to your conclusion based on the evidence, not what an authority figure says, not what the majority opinion is. You have to just put that out of your mind and just look at the evidence and come to your conclusion based on what the evidence tells you.
And you want to know what caused the Big Bang? Well, I would like to know too. So obviously I can't really tell you. We imagine that there was some original material, maybe a small volume of material that started to expand.
What's the oldest book in the Bible? Anybody know? Probably Job. There's not complete agreement on that. There's some disagreement, but Job is likely the oldest book in the Bible, and most people think that Job was written before Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldees, before the founding of the Jewish nation. So it's an ancient book. And isn't it interesting that in the very oldest book of the Bible, we're already talking about stars, and God's taking credit for them. Let's have a look. In Job 9, Job is talking, he says, God is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. Later in the book, God is putting Job in his place, and God says, hey, Job, can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Answer, no. He's saying, Job, I made the stars. I made the constellations. I'm running the show. I'm controlling it all. So here's God taking credit for the constellations and stars. Let's have a look and see what Isaiah says. Isaiah writes, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Incredible. He brings them all out. He has a name for all the stars. Anybody in here ever seen a Hubble Space Telescope photograph? Raise your hands. I'm curious. Almost everybody has, but not everybody has. So I'm going to show you one to make the point. Let me give you something to look at while I'm talking to you. That's the Tadpole Galaxy, and I'll talk about it in just a second. Hubble, if you don't know, I call it a space telescope because it rides outside of Earth's atmosphere, so it doesn't have to look through our smog and haze and pollution and clouds, for that matter. It's out in the vacuum, and so it sees very clearly into very deep space. And since Hubble has existed, we've been able to learn so much about deep space that we didn't have any clue before. For example, we have learned that there are at least 100 billion galaxies the size of our own Milky Way. And each of those galaxies has at least 100 billion stars in it. Feel small yet? This is the Tadpole Galaxy. And I'm showing it to you. I think this is pretty, but also because I want you to see all these little dots. If the room was darker, you'd see yet more. But all these little dots here, that you might mistake those for stars. Those are not stars, those are galaxies. Each one of those has at least 100 billion stars in it, just like our Milky Way. Now, does that make the universe huge from God's perspective? I don't think it necessarily does, because numbers can be very confusing. They can be misleading. A biologist friend of mine told me that I have 100 trillion cells in my body, not billion, trillion cells in my body. Does that make me huge? No, I don't know. It depends on your frame of reference, doesn't it? So we don't know if God thinks the universe is big. God may say, the universe. We're like with the universe. He calls them each by name. Because of God's great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. What does it mean to be missing? It means to be out of place, not where you belong. You mean all the stars, hundreds upon hundreds of billions of stars, are right where God wants them? That's what Isaiah is saying. Now I'm going to show you something that David has said. The thing that makes me just love him is his nickname in Scripture. You know what he's called? He's called the man after God's own heart. I hear that and I'm thinking, oh man, I want that. You know, wouldn't you like to be a person after God's own heart? I mean, love the man, love him. Now, you probably have read this next psalm I'm going to put up here, but you read it wrong. I want you to read it my way. I want you to read it for the verbs. David writes, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. Now, isn't it interesting that David chooses verb after Hebrew verb, all different, to say that the stars communicate? Fascinating. Now, in Romans, Paul is asking a rhetorical question. The rhetorical question is, did the Jews know the Messiah had come? Paul's kind of shocking answer was, yeah, of course they knew. But what I like is the structure of his argument. Look at his argument. Paul says, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. But I asked, did they, my people, the Jews, not hear? Of course they did. And then he quotes David. He says, their voice has gone out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Let me just paraphrase that now. What Paul is saying, yeah, the Jews, my people, knew the Messiah had come because the stars told them. Now, do you make that argument unless something interesting has happened in the sky? You don't make that argument. So obviously something did happen in the sky. What was that? That's what we want to know. That's what we're trying to find out. Jupiter's retrograde is very shallow. If I can get my star to go on. Jupiter goes like this. It slows up. It doesn't blink like that. And it does a very shallow little circle. Kind of a little like that. Yeah, it kind of looks like a halo over somebody. So did Jupiter do that at an interesting time? Well, yes, it did. Let's take a look. I'll animate Jupiter and let it drop a tail so you can watch it. Jupiter passed Regulus, changed its mind, stopped and went back for a second close approach. That's 2. Passed Regulus again, changed its mind, and came back for a third close approach. Triple conjunction, much more rare, much more rare. And if you choose to see it, Jupiter has just drawn a halo or a crown over the king planet. Interesting. I can see king there, can't you? I can see king, 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 right? Some people would say, well, king, 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 you know, new king, or maybe it means birth. I don't know. I can't get much more out of that, but I do see king there. Very true. A lot of stuff still missing, though. I mean, I don't see the Jewish nation up there anyplace. So, of course, there's more. Next, I want to ask you a question. 12 Jewish tribes. One produces Messiah. Which one? Anybody know? You're right. Say it louder. It's Judah. That's right. What's the animal symbol for the tribe of Judah? That's correct. Okay, good. Let me take you to the first book of the Bible. Look at Genesis 49 for a prediction of the coming Messiah. We read, you're a lion's cub, O Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom the scepter belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. I need a prop. I'm going to use this for a prop. Y'all know what a scepter is? The thing that kings hold to show that they're kings, right? I want you to remember this scepter is going to show up again. Okay? So this is a prediction of Messiah coming in his role as King of Kings. Well, that association with the Lion of Judah, that helps us. Let's go back to the sky. If we look at the sky and turn on the constellations, we'll see that Jupiter has been crowning Regulus right here in the constellation Leo the Lion. Well, now I can see an association with the Jewish nation. I can see King, King, King in Leo. And that's pretty interesting. That's pretty cool. Bigger that I got to show you that really spooked me when I saw it. And to do that, I'm going to take you back to the Bible, to the last book of the Bible. We've just been in the first book of the Bible. Now we're in the last book of the Bible, Revelation. And I want to talk a little bit about Revelation first and about its author, because I want to make sure you're all on the same page. It was written by a man named John. He wrote 5 books of the New Testament, including the Gospel. He wrote Revelation when he was an old man, and under dire circumstances. The guy was on the island of Patmos, basically locked up for his Christian beliefs, and he was there, most commentators think, for 6 to 9 months, and basically solitary on a rocky island. And he was old at that point, maybe probably in his 80s, maybe almost, could it even be 90s? And that's when he wrote the book of Revelation. Now all of you who've read it, you know it speaks in a swirling prophetic imagery, and it's a lot of it seems metaphorical. Sometimes it's not chronological. It's a difficult book. It's a difficult book to interpret. But I can't explain most of it. I can, though, explain a little. I'm going to go to Revelation 12 and show you a corner that I think I understand. Let's take a look and see what John describes. He says, a great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. What is the sign? Well, I want you to watch this. It's a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. If you understand this, please email me, okay? His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. Hey, here's that scepter again. Who's the child? That's Jesus in his role as King of Kings. We saw the prediction in Genesis, and here in Revelation he appears again, and he's got that scepter because he's now the King of Kings. So, if the child is Jesus, who's the woman? Yeah, that's pretty easy. Okay. And in metaphorical terms, who's the dragon that waited at the foot of the woman to devour the child? That's Herod. The dragon is Herod. John elsewhere tells us in Revelation that the dragon is Satan, but we know in human terms it was Herod. So we now understand what he's describing is the birth of Jesus, but he sees it in the heavens. I'm going to show you something now that definitely got all the little hairs up on the back of my neck and the back of my arm. And because what follows Jupiter into the sky as we animate the sky is Virgo, the Virgin. And she's clothed in the sun. And she has the moon at her feet. It's just a crescent moon, a very small crescent, barely visible moon. There's a reason for that. This is Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. The sheer weight of symbolism in the sky on this day blew me away.
in September of 3 BC, when Jupiter is coming in a close conjunction with Regulus, the king planet and the king star. That happening in Leo, the lion representing the nation of Judah, the tribe of Judah. That rises in the sky, and behind it rises Virgo, the Virgin. And she's clothed in the sun, and she has the moon at her feet. It's exactly what John described in Revelation 12. It's what he saw in his vision. It's obvious. That got me. When I went the time forward and saw that rise and realized, oh my goodness, that's what John saw. There it is. That really let all the hairs come up.
So I'm looking at all this stuff happening, and everything's just, really moving me. And I'm thinking, man, this may be the birth of Jesus. And then I thought, wait a minute, maybe not. Because Jewish people and a lot of Christian people believe that life begins at conception. So I thought to myself, well, maybe this is the conception of Jesus. Maybe this is the Annunciation, when Gabriel appeared to Mary, and she said, be it done unto me. Well, you can test that, I thought. Well, let's just wind forward 9 months and see if there's anything interesting happening in the sky. So that's what I did. So let's jump forward 9 months. Now, we're still reading from Babylon because I don't think they've left yet. It's now 2 BC. It's June. It's 9 months later. Jupiter has finished crowning Regulus in Leo and is now moving backwards through the constellations like it always does. I'm going to up the sunset because I need the sky to be darker. You can see it setting in the west, of course, like everything does because of the rotation of the Earth. Incidentally, if you're in Babylon and you're looking west, what are you looking toward? Israel. Okay. Now I'm going to show you something that you can see in any planetarium around the world. Even if they don't believe in Jesus or the Bible or anything, they're going to show you this at Christmas. Because all planetaria do Christmas shows. That's the only way they can get you in there, right? And they always show this event because this event is simply so spectacular. Whether they believe in God or not, they're going to show you this shot. I'm going to kind of cheat as I show it to you, though, because observation back then was all naked eye observation. They had no lenses. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to zoom in because I want to show you guys. I'm going to take you in on the secret of what's happening here. They couldn't zoom, but we can, so I'm going to zoom in, way in. Until finally, I get those two objects separated. One of them's Jupiter, the other one's another planet. You're going to tell me which one, too. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That's the mother planet. Venus is the mother planet. So we have Jupiter, the king planet, and Venus, the mother planet, coming into very close conjunction. That seems kind of pregnant, doesn't it? In fact, they got even closer than that. Let me wind time forward just a little bit. What I'm trying to show you is that they really stacked like a figure eight. So they didn't block each other's light. They added. What you had then was two stars stacked on top of each other, too close together to separate with the naked eye. And so to an observer, it appeared to be the brightest star anyone alive had ever seen. We know the math, and so I can tell you that no one alive had ever seen a star that bright. That was it. I believe the star of Bethlehem was the brightest star. So we've seen the birth of the king in the sky. We've seen the brightest star. But now we have the issue of it being in the south. Remember, when they were traveling from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, the star is said to have been before them, ahead of them. So it would have to be in the southern sky. So let's go back to the sky, see if Jupiter did that. They've now traveled to Jerusalem. It's November. I've given them some time for travel. This is south. Remember, Bethlehem is due south from Jerusalem. And at 7 in the morning, sure enough, there in the sky, in the southern sky, is Jupiter, over the little town of Bethlehem. Now the hard part, though. Can a star stop? How can a star stop?
That was a puzzler. Because we all know stars can't stop. I mean, physics and inertia prevent that. So I puzzled with that hard. I worried about that one until I realized that I had the problem upside down. And I had it backwards. The problem is not that stars can't stop. The problem is that all stars are always stopped. I mean, they move like the hour hand on your watch. You can't see it. You know it's moving, but you can see it move. Well, if the problem is that stars are always stopped, what can Matthew have meant by saying the star stopped? And I thought retrograde motion, because of course stars do stop, planets do, in their movement through the field of fixed stars. They stop, they even reverse course. And that's how I think retrograde motion explains what the star stopping was.
So did Jupiter do that? Let's have a look. I'll animate Jupiter and let it drop a tail. And there you see it. Sure enough, Jupiter comes to a full stop and reverses course over the little town of Bethlehem. But I want to show you another screen that's more fun because I can throw dates with it. Now what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to let Jupiter fly through the field of fixed stars, and it's going to throw off dates so we can tell when these events are happening. The first one there, I know it's small, I'll read it for you. It says 10:30 of 2 BC. Now let's fly Jupiter. You see it moving through the fixed stars. That says 11:25 of 2 BC. It's slowing up. It's going to stop right about here, reverse course. The date when it stops over the little town of Bethlehem, 12:25 of 2 BC. Does that date sound familiar? Well, Mr. Larson, you mean they went down there on Christmas? Well, it turns out that's true. Am I saying that Jesus was born on 12/25? No, I'm not saying that at all. Absolutely. In fact, I don't think anyone thinks that. No, what I'm saying is that is quite possibly the date of the first Christmas. Did it have any meaning to them? No, it had no meaning to them because they didn't use our calendar system. I mean, but it does have meaning to us. It could well be a sign to us. Let me give you the chronology now. In September of 3 BC, Jupiter crowns Regulus in Leo. Up rises Virgo, clothed in the sun. New moon, birth at her feet, Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year. 9 months later, the biggest planet goes together with the brightest planet to make the brightest star anyone alive had ever seen. Where? Right over Jerusalem as it sets. The Magi ride. They get there sometime around November. They go to Herod and they say, we've seen the star. Where's the baby king? Herod says, Bethlehem. So they're leaving the gates of Jerusalem to go to Bethlehem, 5-mile trek. And they look up, and there's the star. There's Jupiter, right over this little town of Bethlehem. One of the guys, who's the guy who does the math for the group, he's going, wait. It's in full retrograde. It's stopped right over the little town of Bethlehem. They ride down to Bethlehem on 12/25, 2 BC. We know that's the date because that's when the star stopped. They're carrying gifts, remember? Frankincense, gold, and myrrh. They find the baby boy. Is he living in a manger? No. He's moved. He's in a house now. He's described in Greek as a paidion. He's a toddler. They find the baby boy, and they present these fabulous gifts to him on what turns out to be the first Christmas, 12/25 of 2 BC. And now I've shared with you the Star of Bethlehem, but now I'm going to reveal something to you. It turns out in my studies, I find that the Star of Bethlehem is the beginning of what I think of as a celestial poem that ends at Christ's death. And to show you the full poem, I've got to take you to the day of the cross. I'm going to talk to you about Pentecost, but first I kind of have to give you some background so you'll understand. Jesus was killed at Passover. The next Jewish holiday is a feast. It's called the Feast of Pentecost. It's called Pentecost because it comes 50 days after Passover, so it's Pentecost. Now, Pentecost is a festival, and Jews who could afford to travel came from all the surrounding nations, came back to Jerusalem for this festival, so a lot of out-of-towners in town. Let's do the chronology of Christ's death. Remember, he dies on Passover, he's buried, he rises again. The Bible says that he then appears to people on earth, stays around for 40 days. So he almost makes it to Pentecost, doesn't he? Then he leaves, and he gives instructions, and he says, stay here until you receive power from on high. So they do. The disciples stay in one place, and they're all gathered together, and Pentecost comes, and the weirdest things start happening. Something like a sound of rushing wind happens in the room where they are. Something like fire dances over their heads, and suddenly the disciples begin to speak in foreign languages, other tongues. People who are in town for the Pentecost feast hear the commotion. The crowd starts to gather, and these out-of-towners are hearing their own languages being spoken by a bunch of Galilean fishermen. It gets crazy. The crowd gets big enough that there are hecklers in the back, and one of the hecklers shouts out, says, "Oh, they're just drunk." Peter stands up and says, "They're not drunk. It's only 9 in the morning." Now, I lecture to a lot of college students, and I'm wondering, this is persuasive? So the next thing he does, don't try on your own. What he does next is crazy. He's got a huge crowd, and it's kind of an unruly crowd. He's got hecklers and stuff. And so Peter stands up, and he starts quoting an ancient prophet. This is what he says. He quotes Joel. He says, "I will show wonders in the heaven above and signs on the earth below. Blood," there was been a crucifixion. "Fire," something like fire danced over the disciples' heads. "And billows of smoke, and the sun will be turned to darkness." I think Joel saw a vision of something like smoke that blotted out the sun. "The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood." The moon turned to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. "And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." And then he shouts at him. He says, "Men of Israel, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know." Now, let me tell you why I put italics there. That's a very interesting argument. Let me paraphrase what just happened. Got a rowdy crowd out here. Peter stands up, and he says basically this: Joel predicted a bunch of stuff, and you've seen it. Now, you don't make that argument, especially to a rowdy crowd, unless they've seen the stuff. And one of the things they are said to have seen was a blood moon. Y'all know what a blood moon is? I thought that was weird. I thought that was just weird prophet talk. I don't know. Have you ever read and you see something in Scripture and it just strikes you so strange, like the moon would be turned to blood? You say, "Oh, okay." It just sounds like prophet talk, and I didn't know what it meant. But it turned out I was very wrong. That's a technical term. It's an ancient technical term, and it has a specific meaning. It means a lunar eclipse. Why do they call those blood moons? Because when the moon goes into eclipse, it goes into Earth's shadow. And so it gets no direct illumination from the sun. Instead, the only light that hits the moon under those conditions is refracted through the Earth's atmosphere. It's redshifted. Same thing. The similar phenomenon makes our sunsets red sometimes. So when the light comes through our atmosphere and it's redshifted, it illuminates the moon, which becomes a dull red color. You ever seen one of those? Yeah, pretty spectacular, aren't they? Can be. Well, here's the gist of what we've just seen. Peter says that Joel said there's a blood moon, and you've seen it. So there was an eclipse. Interesting. Now we need to date Christ's execution. The reason we have to do that is otherwise we won't know to look at the sky. We need to know what day we should study the sky to see the end of this poem that I'm showing you. So we have clues. First, we know it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. Okay, some of you may not know what preparation day means. Jews of this time, if they were observant Jews, could not work on the Sabbath, which was Saturday. They couldn't cook, couldn't wash clothes. So if they wanted to eat, they had to prepare it on Friday, and so Friday came to be called preparation day. So all four Gospels say that Jesus was killed on a Friday. Next clue. It was just before the Passover feast. Now, that's super useful because we know when Passover is. We find from Leviticus. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. That's the Jewish lunar month of Nisan. The Jewish calendar is not a solar calendar like the one we use. So those three clues taken together are extremely powerful. And let me explain why. Because their lunar calendar works like our solar calendar in some ways, and this is one of them. Think about your birthday. It's always on the same day of the month, right? Is it always on the same day of the week? No, because in a solar calendar and in the lunar calendar, days of the month can float through the days of the week. Our calendars are alike in that. But that's a clue. It's a huge clue, because now you can see Jesus must have been killed in a year when Nisan 14 happened to fall on a Friday. Can you see that? Okay, that really narrows things down. Let's get some more clues up there. Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. John recounts 3 Passovers during Christ's ministry. And we know he was taken before Pilate. And we know when Pilate sat, because Tacitus, the Roman historian, records it, 26 to 36 AD. So all these things taken together, plus more stuff on the website, come to one conclusion. Only April 3 of 33 AD seems to fit all the lines of evidence. This is the day of the cross. Isaiah says the Messiah was beaten so severely he was hardly recognizable as human. And in that state, they put him on the cross at 9 a.m. It only lasted about 6 hours. But while he was on the cross, all hell broke loose. There were earthquakes, big earthquakes, big enough to bust boulders, because the New Testament tells us this. The sky gets dark at noon. Joel, in his vision of this event, seems to describe billowing clouds of smoke that obscured the sun. Tombs get shaken open. There's a veil in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. It separates the deepest part of the sanctuary from all the people who come to church, synagogue. That was ripped in half from top to bottom, symbolizing ordinary folks having direct access to the Holy of Holies, to God himself, because Messiah's sacrifice made it possible. They had to get him down off the cross before sundown. They had to do that, because otherwise he would defile the Passover. So they got him down. But the signs didn't stop. When the moon rose that evening, it was a blood moon, a lunar eclipse, which probably scared everybody there to death. I mean, I can really honestly think, having lived through all of those events and then seeing the blood moon, being scared spitless. When the moon rises, it's already in eclipse. It's a blood moon. Now, I don't know what the Roman soldiers said when they saw that, but don't you know they were freaked out? I mean, seriously. After all these events during the day, and then the moon comes up and it's a blood moon, they're probably thinking, oh man, wrong side of this one. But there's more, and I want you to see it all. To show you what else there is, I need to take you back to Scripture. Because I want to get some data from Mark. I'm jumping around in the book, because all I want is the time of day. It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him, Mark tells us, and Mark counts from 6. So he's telling us he went on the cross at 9 a.m. At the 6th hour, which is noon, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. Now, nobody wore wristwatches, but Jesus died at about 3. Let's go back to the sky. Now, can you see, if the moon rises in eclipse, that eclipse has to have begun beneath the horizon? If it's already an eclipse, okay. Well, of course, they couldn't look beneath the horizon, but we can. We have software. So I'm now taking beneath the horizon. It's 2 p.m. Jesus is on the cross, and he's still alive. When I animate the sky, I don't think you're going to be surprised at what you see. As Jesus expires on the cross, the moon goes into eclipse. But there's more. To show you what else there is, I need to remind you of the skies of Jesus' birth or perhaps conception. Magnificent imagery: Jupiter crowning Regulus, in Leo, uprises Virgo, the Virgin clothed in the sun, new moon, Rosh Hashanah, spectacular. Now we turn to the sky of Christ's death and turn on the constellations. And you see the moon has returned to the foot of Virgo. But now it's a full moon, a life fully lived, blotted out in blood.
I remember the night when I found the eclipse at Christ's crucifixion. I remember it because of what was happening to me. When I found that the moon was back at the foot of the Virgin, and then when I further found that the moon went into eclipse at the moment my Savior expired on the cross. And I remember exactly what I said. I don't think I could ever forget it. I looked up at the sky, and I said, my God, what did you do?
In our galaxy alone. It's interesting to note that the oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job. It predates Christ by a couple thousand years. In that book, it says in Job 26:7, he hangeth the earth on nothing. Amazing statement. When you stop to think that you can read in other sacred books of other religions that the earth is on the back of elephants who produce earthquakes when they shake. You can read Greek mythology, which says the earth is on layers of honey and butter and sugar. But the Bible says he hangeth the earth on nothing. The oldest book in the Bible, Job, says that the earth is turned like the clay to the seal. Fascinating statement, because if you wanted to sign your signature, in those days that soft clay was used in which to write, you had your signature on a little seal with your name in it. This is the way it was. It was a cylinder, hardened clay, with your signature raised on that cylinder. Through it was a stick so that you could roll it like a rolling pin, and you would roll your signature across the soft clay and sign your signature. That was in Job's times, in the ancient times, and he said the earth is turned like the clay to the seal, which means it rotates on its what? On its axis. Long before anybody discovered that. The word is used in the book of Job when it talks about the klug. It says the earth is a klug, and the Hebrew word means a sphere. A sphere. Job also said, and Galileo discovered this, but centuries before Galileo, the oldest book in the Bible says that God gives weight to the wind. There was no way to measure weight to the wind in that time. It's interesting also that the earth has perfect balance. You ever seen a basketball that's out of balance? It just goes like this when it rolls. Well, you can imagine what would happen if the earth was like that. The earth is a perfect sphere, and it is perfectly balanced. The depths of the sea have to be balanced with the height of the mountains. The weight of the mountains has to be balanced with the weight of the waters. That's called the science of isostasy, and it's incredible. But all the way back in Isaiah 40, again, centuries before science ever even conceived of this, Isaiah says God measures the waters in the hollow of his hand. He measures the heavens with a span. He comprehends the dust of the earth in a measure, and he weighs the mountains in scales and puts the hills in a balance. God alone can do that.
O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. As it is written in the book of Jasher, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since. Now, many people consider this a complete myth. It is just a Jewish folk tale in an attempt to boost their link with a miracle-working God. However, Gerardus Bauer has collected stories of a long day or a long night from several tribes from around the world. Let me just give you a few examples. In Egypt, the Greek historian Herodotus recorded that when he visited Egypt, the priests there showed him an ancient manuscript that told the story of a day that lasted twice as long as a normal day. As they had accurate water clocks, they could record time. They could easily, therefore, record that a long day had taken place. And there are similar references to a long day in both China and in India. Several North American Indian tribes have accounts of long nights. The Ojibways, Wyandots, and Abungis tell of a long night. The Omahas tell of the sun being caught in a rabbit's trap and only released just before dawn. The Dogroots tell of the sun suddenly becoming dark at noon. Similarly, in South America, the Mexicans, Aztecs, Mayans, and Peruvians, and in West Africa also, there are stories of a long night. Now, some may think that these stories have arisen because of the superstitious nature of ancient people. So if so, there would be surely a random distribution. One tribe might have fabricated a story of a long day, and a few miles away, another tribe might have a story of a long night. But that is not what we find, because there are two interesting features of these stories. First of all, if you plot the stories on a map of the world, you see quite quickly that they are gathered into two areas. The long day stories are gathered in one area, Egypt, China and India, and in the second area, North and South America, there are stories of a long night. Now you can plot the shadow of night and day as it travels around the world, and at that time of the year it is like a sine wave, a curve that rises to the north hemisphere and then falls to the south and then goes back to the north again as it travels round the earth. Now it is possible to move this shadow to such a position that the shadow of night completely covers all the long night stories, and the daylight part of the curve on the upper section covers all the long day stories. Therefore, these stories cannot be random local myths, but a worldwide event that actually happened and is recorded in the folk stories of those people that actually experienced it. Now, the other point is that the exact position of the shadow is not certain. It can be moved within certain limits. However, there is one point that defines just where that shadow should be. Sir James Fraser records that on a hillside, on an eastern island of Fiji, the natives tie the weeds together, quote, to stop the sun going down, as it is said that it once did. This places the edge of the shadow at this point, giving a more accurate position for where the sun stood still. From this, Geratus Bauer calculates that the time was about 9 a.m. in Israel. Now, using the historic dates from these tribes, Bauer calculated that it was May the 18th to the 15th in 1448 BC, and that it started at about 9 a.m. for Joshua's long day to begin.
This is the Lord's sign to you, that the Lord will do what he has promised. I will make the shadow cast by the sun go back the 10 steps it has gone down on the stairway of Ahaz.
So the sunlight went back the 10 steps it had gone.
Well, I don't believe you're aware, maybe you are, but I don't believe most people are aware that just a few thousand years ago, at 705 BC, a major worldwide catastrophic event occurred. It actually shifted the entire planet, but it was not a pole shift. In fact, during that time, King Hezekiah reigned, and the sun moved backward in the sky. It did not set. It simply, the planet stopped revolving in its current direction, and it moved backward about 10 hours worth, almost half of a revolution. And then whatever gravitational wave affected it, it released it, and then it continued to move forward in the same direction. At that very same time, 705 BC, according to our current calendar, the ancient Chinese, who were great astronomers, they recorded that the sun set twice in the same day. It set, it rose back up from the west, and it set again. Now,
that sounds like we were doing the moving.
Right. Now, during that time, before that time, we have discovered, it is very well documented over hundreds of years. There are historically 15 ancient calendars that were discovered before that time, that existed before 705 BC.
15
ancient calendars. Every one of those calendars has 360-day years. Every calendar is based on a 360-day year. After that event, every calendar for the next 5 years, all around the planet, all the civilizations changed their calendars. The Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Persians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Mayans, the Hindus. There's every civilization that existed during that time over the next 5 years readjusted their calendars to 365-day years.
Something happened. How did they know this?
They knew it because the stars didn't line up. In fact, they took various approaches. It was very interesting. Numis Pompilius, the second king of Rome, recognized the original calendar, but he added 5 days per year to it to adjust. King Hezekiah Newman's contemporary at that same time reorganized the Jewish calendar in a very bizarre way. He added a month each Jewish leap year on a cycle of every 7 and 19 years to make up the adjustment. Other civilizations made different adjustments as they saw the rotational speed of the Earth change as it moved around the sun. So over the period of the next 5 years, all the civilizations caught up to 365-day years. And today, we have 365-day years, but we didn't have that in the immediate past. Before 705 BC, they were 360 days.
That is amazing.
Until this time now, the time of the end, we can now look and understand the meanings of these original Hebraic words, and it's a mind blower. So let's take word by word and sentence by sentence this text in 2 Samuel. In context, this is a narration of David praying. God answers, and then he is coming to earth from heaven to deliver David from his enemies. This is not some flowery poetic description of some kind of allegorical or spiritualistic text. This is a literal narration under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as to how God is traveling from heaven to earth. He bowed also the heavens and came down. Old Testament Strong's number 5186 says, Natah is a primitive root to stretch or spread out, by implication to bend. In other words, he bent space and came down. To further confirm this idea, the rest of the sentence says that darkness was under his feet. Darkness, Strong's number 6205 from the root 6201, means a gloom or thick, dense darkness that drips down under his feet as a pathway to recon a different area from heaven to earth. This darkness is a thick cloud stretched out or dripping under his feet as a pathway for God to travel. This is describing a black hole or a wormhole.
It's believed that a moving or spinning black hole might actually create what is known as a wormhole, a way of transitioning across space faster than light. Not in any way that violates the laws of science, but in a way that takes advantage of the universe's dimension.
The rest of 2 Samuel 22:10 says, with darkness under his feet. The Hebrew words for darkness and feet, from their root words, can be telling us that the darkness described here is a dense, thick cloud stretched out or dripping around as a pathway for God's feet to examine what is going on. This could be describing a black hole or a wormhole. And seen from a 21st century perspective, just exactly what this scripture could be telling us. He made the deadly darkness his temporary entwined dwelling place as a surrounding, as circular, around him. The stream binds together while the covered dense cloud smashes the elements before him to make an opening from heaven to earth.
This account is taken from 1 Enoch chapter 1. And I came to an empty place, and I saw there neither a heaven above nor an earth below, but a chaotic and terrible place. And there I saw 7 stars of heaven bound together in it, like great mountains, and burning with fire. At that moment I said, For which sin are they bound, and for what reason were they cast in here? Then one of the holy angels, Uriel, who was with me, guiding me, spoke to me and said to me, Enoch, for what reason are you asking, and for what reason do you question and exhibit eagerness? These are among the stars of heaven which have transgressed the commandments of the Lord, and are bound in this place until the completion of 10 million years, according to the number of their sins. I then proceeded from that area to another place, which is even more terrible, and I saw a terrible thing, a great fire that was burning and flaming. The place had a cleavage that extended to the last sea, pouring out great pillars of fire. Neither its extent nor its magnitude could I see, nor was I able to estimate. At that moment I said, What a terrible opening is this place, and a pain to look at. Then Uriel, one of the holy angels who was with me, responded and said to me, Enoch, why are you afraid like this? I answered and said, I am frightened because of this terrible place, and the spectacle of this painful thing. And he said unto me, This place is the prison house of the angels. They are detained here forever. A black hole is the final stage of a star's life, if the star had a mass of at least 3 of our suns. Some black holes are much larger, having a mass of millions or even billions of suns. There isn't any limit to how massive they can become, especially if they are well fed by stars near the center of a galaxy. A supermassive black hole, such as are believed to lurk at the centers of radio galaxies, tend to spew out huge pillars of radiation, some as far as 6,000 light-years or even more. Our entire galaxy is only about 100,000 light-years across, so the 2 ascending and descending pillars of radiation could add up to a total of 12,000 light-years across. A supermassive black hole would be surrounded by stellar and interstellar material, such as dust and other stars. One example of a black hole having captured a star is Cygnus X1. The star seems to be orbiting absolutely nothing at all, but is in fact losing much of its mass in its fatal attraction. A black hole has at its center what is called a singularity, which has an incredible mass and an infinite gravitational pull, but is infinitely small. So great is its pull that the space around it is bent to infinity, and even light cannot escape. Everything that passes a certain point, called the event horizon, is doomed. It is the threshold beyond which there is absolutely no possibility that anything could escape. It is a one-way street. The material that surrounds it forms a white-hot spiraling feature called an accretion disk. In some cases, this accretion disk can outshine its entire galaxy 100-fold. It is paradoxical, but even though no light can escape from a black hole, its accretion disk can be extremely bright. Now that we have the black hole basics down, we can interpret Enoch's vision. The empty place, which is chaotic and does not have a heaven above or an earth below, is outer space. Space is almost completely empty, and it can be called chaotic because there are constantly at work cycles of stellar and planetary birth and death. There is, moreover, no up or down in space. All directions are relative to one another. The great fire that was burning and flaming corresponds to the accretion disk that surrounds and feeds it. The cleavage is the bending of the space-time to infinity. If one imagines space-time as a rubber sheet, this bending of time and space would resemble the kind of funnel that would be the result of a long stick pushing down the center of it. The bending is so extreme and the forces so vast that science doesn't even have the physics to describe it. All laws of physics and quantum mechanics break down, and as yet unknown laws of quantum gravity take over. Time and space literally go out of existence in a singularity. It is an ending point, an infinitesimal boundary to the universe. The last C is the singularity. Under the new physics of quantum gravity, this singularity is somehow a seething mass of something called quantum foam. It is chaotic and not well understood as of yet, but one can see that it would correspond nicely with the word sea, since the sea is both fluid and somewhat chaotic. The great pillars of fire would correspond to the immense radiation jets that spew out from it in both directions, perpendicular to the accretion disk. The fact that Enoch goes on to state that he could neither estimate its extent nor its magnitude lets us know that the forces at work in it are infinite and impossible to describe or even conceive of. Another account of this black hole is given in chapter 18, verses 10 through 16. A place beyond the great earth where the heavens come together. And I saw a deep pit with heavenly fire on its pillars, and I saw inside them descending pillars of fire that were immeasurable in respect to both altitude and depth. And on top of that pit I saw a place without the heavenly firmament above it, or earthly foundation under it, or water. There was nothing on it, not even birds, but it was a desolate and terrible place. And I saw there the 7 stars which were like great burning mountains. Then the angel said to me, "This place is the ultimate end of heaven and earth. It is the prison house for the stars and the powers of heaven, and the stars which roll over upon the fire. They are the ones which have transgressed the commandments of God from the beginning of their rising, because they did not arrive punctually. And he was wroth with them, and bound them until the time of the completion of their sin in the year of mystery." The fact that this place is beyond the great earth firmly establishes its location in outer space. When it says that it is the place where the heavens come together, this indicates that it is a boundary to the fabric of space and time. The deep pit is the infinite bending of time and space that occurs beyond the event horizon. Again, the pillars are the radiation jets that pour out of it. The fact that stars, a code word for the fallen angels, are in orbit around it correctly indicates that stars can be and often are captured by black holes. The image of the stars rolling correctly reflects the fact that stars rotate as they orbit it.
very first verse, one sentence, translated in English as, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." It contains exactly 10 words. But in the original Hebrew, there are exactly 7 words. And these 7 words possess 7 distinctive features of the number 7 contained within that sentence. As far as anyone has been able to determine thus far, only this one verse in all the Bible contains 7 features of the number 7 out of 7 words. Consider these 7 features. Feature number 1. The number of Hebrew words in this verse is exactly 7. Feature 2. The total number of Hebrew letters in the 7 words is exactly 28, or 4 times 7. Feature 3. The 3 leading words in this verse of 7 words are, of course, God, the subject, and heavens and earth, the objects. The number of letters in the Hebrew words that make up these 3 words is exactly 14, or 2 times 7. The number of letters in the remaining words of the verse is also 14, or 2 times 7. Feature number 4. The expression of the 2 objects of this sentence, the heavens and the earth, in Hebrew, is made up of 14 letters, or 2 times 7. Feature number 5. The shortest word is in the middle. The number of letters in this word, and the word to its left, is 7. The number of letters in the middle word, and the word to its right, is also 7. Feature number 6. There are 3 important nouns in this first verse: God, heaven, and earth. The numeric gematria values of these 3 nouns are 86, 395, and 296, respectively. Gematria is the 3,000-year-old Hebrew rabbinical practice of assigning numerical values to each of the Hebrew letters. When these 3 numerical values are added together, the total value is 777, or 777, or 111, 111 times 7. In God's manner of biblical expression, this triple intensification of his perfect number 7 is the strongest possible manner of speaking the touch of his divinity. And feature number 7. The numeric value of the only Hebrew verb in this verse, created, or bara, is 203, which is exactly 29 times 7. These sevens, these numeric features or facts, are strangely hidden beneath the surface. They are truly beyond the view of ordinary readers of the Hebrew text, and they are discovered only by special investigation and counting. Surely they could not have been foreseen or purposely placed there by the original author. According to the law of chances, for any one feature of a 7-word sentence to be a multiple of 7 accidentally is only 1 chance in 7. But for 7 features of this one 7-word sentence to be a multiple of 7 accidentally is 1 chance in 823,543. An exponentially amazing impossibility, especially considering that the number 7 is used purposely by the biblical writers over 500 times from Genesis to Revelation to indicate the divine touch of God. It is as though God is telling those who have eyes to see in the very first verse that his divine touch is upon this word we call the Bible. This startling revelation of 7s has only been discovered in the last few years of human history.
The word Torah in Hebrew consists of 4 letters, a Tau, a Vav, a Resh, and a He, which are equivalent for us to talk about it as if it was a T, an O, an R, and an H. We should note here that the Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters that are essentially consonants. Vowels are generally simply inferred. The Vav operates sort of what we would consider as an O, but it's not considered a vowel. In the book of Genesis, if you go to the first equivalent of a T and count 49 letters, and then take the next one, in other words, the 50th letter, is the equivalent of what we would consider a Vav. It's what we would consider an O. You count another 50 letters, it's a Resh, or like our R. You count another 50 letters, and you come to a He, or like an H. In other words, it's as if you found a T-O-R-H at 49-letter intervals. It spells the word Torah. Rather remarkable in its own right, but one of those things you could dismiss as just a happenstance. But when you get to Exodus, you discover the same thing happens. You come to a T, 49 letters plus 1, you get to the O, the R, and the H, the same way. And so again, this starts to look very designed. In fact, it's rather interesting that this number 50 are the number of days from the Exodus to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. In pursuing this further, you go to the book of Leviticus, the third book, and nothing like this happens. But you go to the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers, the same thing happens, but only if you spell Torah backwards. Kind of weird. You go to the book of Deuteronomy, again you find the equivalent thing, but only if you spell it backwards. Now, you wonder, what does this mean? And you stand back from it all. It's as if those four books are pointing to the middle book, two forward, two back, to the book of Leviticus. So you examine Leviticus more carefully, and you discover not 49 letter intervals, but 7 letter intervals. Every 8th letter, you have the word Yahweh, or the name of God. And you stand back from this whole thing, and you realize the Torah is always pointing to the name of God.
Ramsel began his search for the name of Yeshua, or Jesus, in the codes. He used the same skip sequence technique as Weissmandl had done many years earlier. And like Weissmandl, Ramsel didn't have a computer. What he did have was an enormous amount of dedication and a firm belief that the codes hinted at by the Jewish sages were real.
In Genesis 1, in the Torah, beginning in the 5th verse, the first word, counting every 172 letters, spells the name Yeshua in Hebrew, which means Jesus. Then at the end of the Torah in Deuteronomy, starting at the very last portion, counting in reverse every 172 letters, spells HaMashiach, the Messiah. In Genesis 20 and verse 2, counting every 5 letters in there, Hakarek Ot Shlav in Hebrew, which means in English, the lattice work of the equidistant letter sequence. The meaning of the insight is the method by which we found it. Now, if this is not scientific, I don't believe there's anything scientific. This is the most remarkable insight proving that the letter sequence is ethical, it's mathematical, it's scientific, and it sets a pattern. And we have the 10 Commandments recorded in Exodus 20th chapter. There are 179 words in that chapter. And every 179th letter, we have a wonderful insight. If you count every 179th letter, it spells Hosea Yeshua Shmi, which means salvation of the Lord Jesus is my name.
There's another place that God appears to have laid out his plan in advance, and that's in some subtleties, and one of which I'd like to share with you in Genesis chapter 5, a genealogy. The genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 goes from Adam, the first man, down through Noah. And in Genesis chapter 5, if you wade through that, I encourage you to make a list of the names. Adam gave birth to Seth. Seth, Enosh. Enosh, Kenan. Kenan, Mahalalel. Mahalalel, Jared. Jared, Enoch. Enoch, Methuselah. Methuselah, Lamech. And Lamech was the father of Noah. Let's take these names. 10 names. But see, the problem is we need to know what the names mean. And if you have a study Bible or a source, a lexicon, what have you, you know that the name Adam means man. As you go through your Bible, when these names are typically first introduced, most of your marginal footnotes will tell you what the name means. Adam means man. Seth means appointed. Enosh means mortal. Kenan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And the word Noah means rest or comfort. Now, let's read that genealogy as a sentence. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort. Isn't that wild?
scatter you. I'm going to give you other languages, and I'm going to set all of you nations, you're each going to be put under the dominion now of lesser Elohim. Here's where the sons of God come in. And they become corrupt in their administration of the nations. That's why they're being judged in Psalm 82. It's exactly what it says, that they have administered the nations of the earth poorly and corruptly, and God is going to judge them. He says, I said that you were gods, but you're going to die like men because of what you've done. This is the Old Testament rationale for where we get pantheons, the gods of the other nations. Well, they are disloyal members of the divine council that God put over the nations.
When Egypt is mentioned, most of us think of the pyramids. Tourists visit Egypt to look at the ruins of magnificent temples found there. These monuments are all reminders of Egypt's very long history and considerable greatness. The majority of ruins date back thousands of years. They come from a time when Egypt was ruled by the famous pharaohs. Encyclopedia Britannica talks about an almost unbroken line of native rulers that lasted nearly 3,000 years. Toward the end of this long line of native rulers, the Bible prophet Ezekiel made the bold prediction, "There shall no longer be princes from the land of Egypt." Ezekiel predicted that Egypt would not have any more Egyptian royal rulers. This was a daring prediction after almost 3,000 years of rule by Egyptian pharaohs. Visitors to Egypt these days see many reminders of how right Ezekiel was. There's a lot of visible evidence of these successive non-Egyptian rulers. This temple in the Luxor temple complex dates from the time of the Greeks. Next came the Romans. These ruins of a Roman amphitheatre are in Alexandria. The Muslim Arabs followed. One of their mosques is built into the ruins of the famous Luxor temple. Other mosques remind us of other foreign rulers. The Hassan Mosque in Cairo was built in the style of the Mamluks. They ruled Egypt for over 200 years. Mamluks were Muslim slave soldiers whose influence and power grew until they became the main military power. The Ottoman Turks then ruled Egypt for almost 300 years. The Alabaster Mosque in Cairo was built in their style. The Ottomans divided Egypt into 24 provinces. The Mamluks, meantime, were still very influential, and each province was ruled by a Mamluk known as a Bey. The Alabaster Mosque was actually built by Muhammad Ali, an Albanian who established himself as Egypt's ruler in 1805. During his dynasty, the British had considerable influence in Egypt. This mosque in Cairo is dedicated to President Nasser, who overthrew Muhammad Ali's dynasty in 1952. Encyclopedia Britannica makes the observation that Nasser emerged as the first native Egyptian ruler in more than 2,000 years. Nasser led a bloodless coup which toppled the monarchy, and Egypt became a republic. Nasser was a president, not a royal ruler like the pharaohs. So Egypt continues with no prince, as Ezekiel predicted. Before this period of domination by foreign rulers, the prophet Ezekiel made this comment about Egypt. It will be the lowliest of kingdoms, and will never again exalt itself above the other nations. I will make it so weak that it will never again rule over the nations. Egypt has declined from its previous dominant position in world politics. Even today, it is still a very underdeveloped country, just as the Bible prophet predicted. Egypt is dependent on the River Nile for its agriculture. Equally important are the irrigation canals that take water to the surrounding land. The problem was that Egypt's foreign rulers neglected these irrigation systems. This book tells us Ottoman governors and Mamluk beys alike neglected irrigation and related agricultural works, allowing the country's economy to deteriorate. The Ottomans and Mamluks ruled Egypt in this disastrous way for hundreds of years. The prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel predicted these problems. Isaiah predicts the canals will stink, the streams of Egypt will dwindle and dry up, every sown field among the Nile will become parched. And Ezekiel says, I will bring desolation upon the land and everything in it by the hand of foreigners. It's interesting to see that the prophet Isaiah correctly predicted that irrigation problems would devastate Egypt's agriculture. We can also see the accuracy of Ezekiel's prediction that foreigners will be responsible for the devastation. Another interesting prediction made by Ezekiel is that God will sell the land to evil men. For long periods, the majority of Egyptians lived in poverty to support the rulers who lived in considerable luxury. Jason Thompson, in his book A History of Egypt, talks about the exploitation by the Ptolemies, the Greek royal family who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC. The Ptolemies carefully surveyed Egypt, assessed its productivity, devised a means of local administration designed to extract the maximum amount of revenue. The population of Ptolemaic Egypt consisted of a comparatively small number of relatively privileged Greeks superimposed onto the great masses of native Egyptians, most of whom lived around subsistence level, but whose back-breaking labour supported Ptolemaic society. A later example is that of Sultan Hassan, who ruled Egypt in the mid-14th century. He showed he had no feelings for the Egyptian people by building this magnificent mosque just after people had died in vast numbers from the Black Death Plague, which struck in 1347. He financed the building from death duties and by confiscating the estates of people who died without heirs. He spared no expense, making the mosque as grandiose as he could. This is just one more case of the rulers treating the Egyptians badly. Even though Egypt is now ruled by Egyptians, the same problem still persists. The contrast between rich and poor in Egypt is very obvious to anyone visiting the country today. Some areas of Cairo are very modern and have very comfortable hotels for the tourists. The vast majority of people live in very poor housing. They eke out a peasant-like existence working the land. Modern roads are used by both modern and ancient forms of transport. We can see that Ezekiel's prediction that Egypt will be treated badly by its rulers has been fulfilled all down history and is still true today. There's another remarkable prophecy about the Egyptians made by the prophet Ezekiel. This is what the Lord says: their cities will lie among ruined cities. No words can be more appropriate to Egypt. There are countless ruins between the modern cities. Most of Egypt's tourism comes from people wanting to visit the remains of ancient cities. The modern city of Luxor is near to the spectacular ruins of ancient Luxor, Karnak and Thebes. The question, where can I find ruins in Egypt, has been asked on the website answers.com. The reply given started, there are ruins almost everywhere. Satellites are now being used to find more ruins. Archaeologists believe they have unearthed only a small fraction of Egypt's ancient ruins. Yet again we can see the accuracy of Bible predictions. Egyptian cities are surrounded by ruins of earlier cities. So to summarise, we've seen that the Bible prophets predicted that Egypt would be ruled by foreigners. These foreign rulers would treat the Egyptians very badly. The prophets predicted that Egypt would continue, but not as a big player in world politics. They also predicted that it would have major irrigation problems and be devastated by foreign rulers. Finally, we saw that Egypt would be a land of ruins. Now let's think about the Egyptian city of Thebes. The site of this ancient Egyptian city is about 800 kilometers south of the Mediterranean, on the eastern bank of the River Nile. At one time, it was the capital city of Egypt. The area has been called the world's greatest open-air museum. Thousands of international tourists come each year to visit its temple ruins. Here are the magnificent ruins of the temple at Karnak, part of the ancient city of Thebes. We can see the past grandeur of the city and its temple from the ruins that we can see today. The size of the people shows the vast scale of the temple. While this enormous temple was still in use, God told the prophet Ezekiel, I will inflict punishment on Thebes and cut off the hordes of Thebes. Thebes will be taken by storm. This prediction about Thebes was finally fulfilled in the 1st century BC. It was besieged by the Greeks. For 3 years it held out against the besiegers. But when it did eventually fall, the Greeks levelled most of Thebes to the ground. The city was taken by storm, just as Ezekiel predicted. The city eventually continued as several hamlets. Here is one of them, now known as Luxor. Compared to the time when it was the capital city of Egypt, the population has drastically reduced. The hordes of people living there were indeed destroyed, as Ezekiel predicted. So we have seen that Ezekiel correctly predicted that Thebes would suffer an attack from a large force. He also predicted that its large population would be dramatically reduced. We'll now look at the ancient city of Memphis. Like Thebes, Memphis is on the River Nile, but it's considerably closer to the Mediterranean Sea. Memphis remained an important city until the Muslims conquered Egypt. It was then largely abandoned and became a source of stone for the surrounding settlements. There are two interesting Bible predictions about Memphis. Memphis will be laid waste and lie in ruins without inhabitant. Here we see how literally this has been fulfilled. The site of Memphis is now marked by an open-air museum. The second prediction is even more detailed. This is what the sovereign Lord says: I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images in Memphis. This detailed prediction was absolutely right about the destruction of the city, including its temples. As we've seen, there are grand temple ruins in many other places in Egypt, but not in Memphis. Egypt isn't the only nation that the Bible prophets mention. There are some interesting prophecies relating to other nations. One of the neighbours of ancient Egypt was Edom. It occupied land at the southern end of the Dead Sea, including some of modern Jordan. Here is one of the spectacular buildings in the ancient city of Petra, a market city of the Edomites. It was on the main trade routes and was very prosperous. The area had flash floods, and archaeologists have found that the inhabitants of Petra controlled these floods by the use of dams, cisterns and aqueducts. The aqueducts can still be clearly seen at Petra. These innovations meant that water could be stored ready for prolonged periods of drought. It enabled the city to prosper in what was a desert area. This meant that it was a welcome oasis on the main commercial routes which passed through. In 106 AD, the Romans took control of Petra, which continued to prosper under Roman rule for a time. But as new trade routes opened up, activity at Petra declined. In 363 AD, a very destructive earthquake hit the area, damaging the vital water distribution system. This earthquake seems to have hastened Petra's end as an important centre of trade. Eventually the city, along with Edom itself, declined and became desolate. This is just as Ezekiel predicted. I will make Mount Seir a desolate waste and cut off from it all who come and go. The prophet Ezekiel refers to Edom as Mount Seir because that's the area where the Edomites lived. When Petra ceased to be an oasis and the trade routes changed, it was very true that those who come and go were cut off. So we've seen that the Bible correctly predicted that the land of the Edomites would become desolate and the decline would be caused by the disappearance of passing traders. That ends our brief look at just a few of the many detailed predictions about Middle East nations. I will now hand you back to Matt, who will look at fascinating predictions about the superpowers that led to the nations of modern Europe.
Thank you, Karen. Most of us are aware of the idea of superpowers. They are countries that exert a significant influence over other nations in the world, like America does today. Now, Babylon was such a superpower in its day. The ruins of its capital city are in modern Iraq, and the grandeur of ancient Babylon can be seen from this replica of the Ishtar Gate, which is at the entrance of the ruins of the ancient city of Babylon. Now, the Jewish prophet Daniel lived under the influence of superpower Babylon. He recorded a dream which the king of Babylon had. It gave an overview of how Babylon would be one of the successive superpowers which led to the nations of modern Europe. Daniel told the king what the dream meant, and he outlined what would happen for the 2,500 years following the fall of the Babylonian superpower. Here we can see the extent of the Babylonian Empire. The prophet Daniel told the king of Babylon, "After you, another kingdom will rise. Next, a third kingdom will rule. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom." Now, the first part of the prediction that Daniel made was, "After you, another kingdom will rise." The Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire around 540 BC. These are the ruins of the city of Persepolis in Iran, which served as the capital of the Persian Empire for several generations, and ruins of a number of colossal buildings exist on the site. The next part of Daniel's prediction was, next, a third kingdom will rule. It was in 331 BC that the Medo-Persian Empire was replaced by the Greek Empire, and the famous Greek general Alexander the Great defeated the Persian army. The Parthenon, a temple in Athens, is one reminder of the Greek Empire. The Greeks have had a great influence on our world in many areas. For example, the idea of democracy has its roots in Greek political thought, and Athens was, in fact, the first city to have a voting system as part of its government. Daniel then went on to say, finally, there will be a fourth kingdom. It was around 150 BC that the Greek power began to be overcome by the Roman power, and in the next few years, the Roman power expanded and replaced the Greek Empire. The Roman Empire reached as far as England. Hadrian's Wall protected the northern extent of the Roman Empire. Daniel then told the king that the fourth kingdom will be a divided kingdom and will not remain united. We can see that Daniel was predicting that the fourth superpower would not be conquered by another, but would fall apart and become divided. Now, the Roman Empire split into East and West in AD 395, before being invaded by several tribes. And these invasions caused conflict and division, which eventually resulted in the nations of modern Europe today. The flags of the nations of Europe are indeed a reminder of the accuracy of this remarkable prediction made by Daniel.
Calcium plus sulfur plus fire yields gypsum ash, and that is exactly what remains of these cities. These structures appear as rock formations from a distance, but those who venture out into this deserted, lion-prowled wasteland soon find their trek to become laborious as they sink ankle deep in this gypsum ash. When this ash is subjected to flame, it does not even change color. It has already been completely consumed. Substances burned with sulfur can have a higher remaining ash weight than the original substance. That may explain, in part, how this sphinx-shaped object and others like them can remain standing throughout the centuries. The layers of ash, twisted and warped by the intense heat, finally settle into a form that much resembles the original object. The minimal rainfall on this desert contributes to the longevity of these structures, slowly compacting the layers of ash through the centuries. A 90-degree angle rarely occurs in nature, a phenomenon that we diligently search for when looking for a man-made artifact. And on this plateau, we observe two identical elongated pyramids, which highlight the grand entry into the temple site here at Gomorrah. They are identical in length, width, height, and angle of incline, an impossible combination for a naturally occurring rock formation. The entire area surrounding Gomorrah is rock. These are the mountains of Judea, and we are standing on the remains of Herod's mountain fortress of Masada. At its base are the stone cordon encampments of the Roman army that besieged the Jewish zealots who were barricaded on this mountain after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 of the Common Era. The Romans encamped on the gravel bed of this surrounding plain, but the city of Gomorrah beyond these encampments is unique in its structure and composition. Walls, buildings, and temple structures reminiscent of the ancient temples of Babylon are preserved as heavy gypsum ash. Moses referred to the condition of this area by saying, "The Lord overthrew Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim in his anger and wrath. The whole land is brimstone and salt and ashes. It is not sown, nor bears fruit, nor grows any grass." Mineral salts from the bodies of the incinerated citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah continue to leach to the surface even after 4,000 years. After the atomic bombs were dropped that ended World War II in the Pacific, U.S. military inspectors at Hiroshima found piles of white powder near the blast site. Analysis proved the powder to be the mineral salts of the incinerated individuals who were vaporized in the fireball. All that was left was a pile of salt. That discovery and the salt licks of Sodom and Gomorrah may answer the question, what became of Lot's wife? The scriptures indicate she turned back to the doomed city and became not a literal pillar, but in the Hebrew, a memorial of salt. All that's left of her and the entire population is the mineral salts which the desert gazelle now eat. These four locations have yielded the same ashen features and brimstone remains that we see here in the city of Gomorrah. The brimstone found here is unique to this part of the earth. Samples have been analyzed in laboratories in the U.S. and also in one of the most prestigious laboratories in the world, the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, which awards the Nobel Prize in the field of science. Critical analysis showed this sulfur to be 95.72% pure sulfur, with 3 other trace metals which could generate sufficient heat to melt even stainless steel. Several years ago, I spent an entire week camped out under the stars here in the city of Gomorrah. I'd heard that an archaeologist in the early 1800s had found this site and reported its location. In 1989, another archaeologist stumbled onto this site while working in the area. When I was introduced to the evidence, I was compelled to make a journey to this desert. Trudging my way through the ash by the light of the full moon, I crested an ashen incline onto this moonlit plateau. Pale yellow balls of sulfur, exposed by a recent fall rain, were perched on the surrounding ash. I crushed one between my fingers and inhaled. This was the reason that I journeyed over 8,000 miles. As a skeptic, I had to see and smell this testimony for myself. I returned to Jerusalem a week later with a suitcase full of brimstone. Finding friends in the old city, I related my adventure to a growing audience who was eager to see if brimstone would still burn after 4,000 years in the desert. Touching a match to a small piece, it immediately became a black oozing mass with a purple flame. We began to choke and gag as the hot sulfur dioxide fumes seared our lungs. We evacuated the building and got the brimstone out of the building onto the street where it burned itself out. And that was the last time that I lit brimstone indoors. But I did learn a valuable lesson. Being unable to breathe in the presence of the poisonous gases emitted from the brimstone, the inhabitants of the cities would have been rendered unconscious. They would have died a relatively painless death before their bodies and diseases were cleansed in the fire. Even in judgment, our Creator is merciful. I find fascinating parallels in the history of Sodom and Gomorrah and that of our current culture, especially in the United States. The document, which has become commonly known in America as the Declaration of Independence, recognizes that the Creator has endowed every human being with absolute rights, that no civil or religious entity has the right to alienate from the individual. The public school system in the United States was originally established to teach children how to read the Bible so that they could never be stripped of their God-given rights. For the past several generations, however, the Department of Re-Education in Washington, D.C. has forced the once independent schools to teach that life is just the result of millions of years of aberrant chance mutations in a purely mechanical universe, and there is no creator. The nice sterile term for this is evolution. But if there is no creator, then there are no creator-given rights upon which our republic was founded. Without God-given rights, we are left with only government-given rights. And what the government giveth, the government taketh away. If there is no creator, we have neither God-given rights nor God-given responsibilities. There is no right or wrong. And we, like all animals, are reduced to survival of the fittest. And if it feels good, do it. Just as surely as the Almighty does not rain fire and brimstone down on every generation or city in which there's gross wickedness, He has left a testimony in the earth for these last days. God's judgment on Sodom brought relief to those who were shackled in dungeons until they were abused to death. It ended the rape and murder of other men who had entered into the city expecting to conduct business and then return to their wives and children, only to be defiled mercilessly before being bludgeoned to death. It ended child pornography and sex slave markets. It ended kidnapping and prostitution rings. It ended the murder of babies conceived in the free sex atmosphere of Sodom's singles bars, church dating clubs, and the private studies of lawless clergy. Perhaps it ended the first syphilis and AIDS epidemics that would have wiped out the world before the age of modern medicine.
What has happened to truth in our day? Where did we lose out? Where did we go wrong? What has become the malady that best describes why we are on the wrong track? This arena of lies and falsehood where we are risking the whole next generation with a false sense of entitlement. Skepticism is the hallmark of university education today. You can go to campus after campus and they deny the very possibility of knowing. Fascinating, isn't it? You come out of a university education at the end of it basically saying you cannot believe anything. You cannot know anything. Intent is prior to content. The question is, does this generation really want truth? Revelation displaced by reason, truth subverted by agnosticism, rationalism fails, existentialism fails, and lastly, the propositional is replaced by the visual. This is possibly the darkest reality of our time. So the young scholar sitting before the professorial lectern is absolutely convinced that truth is merely relative. And what has happened is that he has lost sight of the fact of what Jesus said about the eye. He said, let your eye be single. The eye is the lamp of the body. William Blake put it in these words, this life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and goads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye. We are meant to see through the eye with the conscience. We are being taught to see with the eye, devoid of a conscience. And in reality, nothing is so beautiful as the good, nothing so monotonous and boring as evil. But in our imagination, it's the other way around. Fictional good is boring and flat. Fictional evil is varied, intriguing, attractive, and full of charm. The poles have been reversed. Good has become boring. Evil has become intriguing.
This particular artifact was taken out of the Red Sea. It was taken to Cairo, Egypt, to the Department of Antiquities, where it was then assembled on an 8-foot table. The director of the Department of Antiquities came in, and as he approached the table, he blurted out, "That's 18th dynasty." And they asked him, "Well, how do you know? Looking at this piece of coral so quickly, how do you know?" He said, "This is an 18th dynasty chariot wheel. It's a 6-spoke chariot wheel, just like the chariot wheels found in King Tutankhamun's tomb. It is the same diameter. It is the same 6-spoke. And as we see in Heliopolis, in the 18th dynasty, it shows the 6-spoke chariot wheel. He knew exactly what it was, and so that chariot wheel is now buried in the Department of Antiquities. Don't expect that you'll ever see it in the light of day, because they still, most of them, don't want to admit that Israel was ever in Egypt. Because modern Egyptology is based on a ridiculous fairy tale. When the Syrian Greek general conquered Egypt and Israel, he requested a history of the people of the land from both the Hebrews, the Israelites, and the Egyptians. So the Hebrews responded in this way. They got together 72 scholars who translated the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, from Hebrew into Greek. It became known as the Septuagint. That is what they presented the Syrian Greek conqueror as the history of the Jewish people. The Egyptians had one priest named Manetho concoct a history. He said for 10,000 years, gods ruled Egypt. After that, for 10,000 years, gods and men ruled Egypt. And after that, 10,000 more years, men ruled Egypt. Even in the Egyptian records, the oldest records of Manetho vary in over 1,800 names of pharaohs and gods. The Egyptians didn't even treat this as being legitimate. They knew it was a fairy tale, but yet modern Egyptology is based on the fairy tale rendition of one priest, Manetho, while the rest of the world scoffs at the Hebrew Scriptures, which gives an accurate detail. And that is what all modern biblical criticism is based on, Egyptology. Well, tonight we are going to look at the Hebrew Scriptures, and we're going to see the reality of these things.
Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea, in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
This particular artifact is so exciting because here you can see the chariot cab and then the broken off chariot wheel, and this is just 100 meters from the Saudi side, from the side of Midian. This is one that I love. Here you can see this is the chariot wheel, the axle, and another chariot wheel. This is the diameter, the wheels are the diameter of the chariots in King Tutankhamun's tomb. The width between the wheels is the same width as the chariot in Tutankhamun's tomb. All chariots have the same width of wheels. Why? Because it is the width of the rear end of 2 horses. In every culture, the chariot wheels are the same width, the width of the rear end of 2 horses. And it's exactly that width in this chariot that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb.
From high atop the jagged pinnacle of Mount Horeb in northwest Saudi Arabia, we found ourselves gazing in awe toward the south at the majestic beauty of Mount Sinai. Blackened and different from all its surrounding companions, this mountain stands apart at first glance. As we began our climb up the northern flank of this unique mountain, the dividing line between light and dark granite became glaringly obvious. Exodus 24:17 records that the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on top of this mountain. And now, sitting on Sinai's very peak, the color of these rocks can truly be seen. Coming into view now is the granite peak called the Brown Laws by ancient maps. After extensive research, we believe that Horeb and Sinai are 2 distinct mountains, and that is why they're referred to that way in Scripture. But for now, we'll go back to our view from the top of Sinai, and as you can see here, the valley floor below is enormous and well able to contain the huge numbers comprising those who came out of Egypt. About halfway up the eastern face of Sinai is this hidden valley that can't be seen from below. Exodus 24:9 and 10 tells us of a meeting of the Lord with Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. They saw God at a distance and as it were a pavement of sapphire under his feet. And glancing upward to where the glassy blackness appears, it's not difficult to imagine a deep blue shine here from the glory of the Lord. Looking all the way down into the camp, we get our first glimpse of the altar to the golden calf. Fenced and forbidden by the Saudis to enter, we would have to devise a plan to get close-up footage of this on another trip. In the same manner, close in to the base of Sinai, we saw the clear image of a double-walled corral leading up to a slaughter area and an altar of earth and uncut stone. Just behind the altar is a dry stream bed running from the mountain all the way into the valley below. Moses cast the remnants of the golden calf into the brook that came out of the mount, according to Deuteronomy 9:21. Here you can see the fence that the Saudis have erected to keep people out of this area. It is extensive and encloses a guard outpost visible here. They are quite serious about keeping the eyes of the world off this mountain.
Back to the valley, a small white building is surrounded by a rectangular fence. We believe this was built over the ruins of the original tabernacle. Oddly enough, in a high plain between Horeb and Sinai, another rectangular set of stone ruins has been left alone. Moses moved the tabernacle away from the main camp after the golden calf incident. Evidence of this is plainly found here. My sister Chelsea and I were also with my parents when we located the almond trees. These are important to find on the mountain because Aaron's rod was made from an almond tree and budded and produced ripe almonds according to Numbers 17:8. The bowls of the golden candlestick were also fashioned after the almond tree. Just as an interesting note, Horeb and Sinai are also covered with fig trees. Though subject to much debate, the nation of Israel has many times been referred to as the fig tree in prophecy. They are to be found only on these 2 mountains. Finally, quail can be seen all over the area to this day. It is theorized that they fly in huge numbers over the sea from Egypt, only to fall to the ground exhausted on the Arabian side. Exodus 16:13 reads, "And it came to pass at evening, when the quails came up and covered the camp."
Just in front of the corral and the altars are the remains of white pillars and their foundation stones. We have found them to be made of a crude alabaster and discovered the source of this stone near the crossing site of the Red Sea. Moses built an altar and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel as recorded in Exodus 24:4. These pillars are each of differing sizes, possibly according to the number of each tribe of Israel that they represented. As you can see, they are very, very well preserved. Looking back upward from the altar area, a large cave is visible from below. 1 Kings 19:8 and 9 tell us that Elijah came to Horeb, mountain of God, and then found a cave to lodge in. This is yet another bit of evidence needed to identify Mount Sinai, found here at Jebel Oz. I was only able to get inside this cave once, but it was well worth this spectacular view of the valley below.
Referring to our ancient text, Joshua 6:20 says that on the 7th day, at the sound of the trumpets, the wall collapsed.
And the Bible is very specific in how it describes that event. The Hebrew wording there is the walls, takafha, fell beneath themselves. And on the 7th trip around, we're told in the Bible, the mud brick wall collapsed and it fell outward and down to the base of the stone retaining wall. And when the archaeologists dug in this area, they found this pile of mud bricks all the way along the retaining wall.
So where I am right now is where the pile of red bricks were found.
That's correct.
The Germans, Garstang, and Kenyon all found these piles of collapsed mud bricks while excavating at the base of the stone retaining wall.
Then she shows that she dug down the side of that, the outside of that revetment wall, and then there were reddish collapsed bricks that she said came from the top of that stone wall.
Yes. Which is another reason to suppose that these weren't, there were walls on top. They're not in situ, but the collapsed brick has come down, yes. If you have a brick wall sitting on top of a stone revetment and it falls over, where else can the bricks go? They've got to go to the bottom.
And so with that pile of bricks, what does that tell us? Does that tell us that there was a destruction of the wall?
Certainly. It certainly is evidence of that destruction.
These fallen bricks from the city wall can be seen in this diagram from Kenyon's excavation report. In her write-up, she makes it clear that it was not the stone retaining wall that fell, but rather the mud brick wall that once stood on top of it.
And so she writes that up in her report, that here we have a collapsed city wall, and here's the evidence for it.
The archaeological understanding of how the walls of Jericho fell matches well with the ancient description of the wall falling beneath itself.
This find of a collapsed city wall found here at Jericho is unique in archaeology. At no other site have we found evidence for a city wall that has fallen down.
Yes, there were remains of the mud brick that had fallen down. I mean, that wall came tumbling down.
So the Bible says that the wall came tumbling down. The archaeologists then came and dug Jericho, and what did they find? They found a collapsed city wall. This fits perfectly with the description from the ancient text.
And when you have that text, and you have the archaeology, and you can fit them together, then you have the evidence from both sides, the literary evidence and the actual physical evidence from what the Bible is talking about.
Another interesting detail regarding the walls of Jericho is found in Joshua 6:20. It says that after the walls collapsed, the Israelites went up into the city. Kenyon's excavation report shows that the pile of fallen mud bricks could have been used as a ramp by the charging Israelites. Because that would be a problem, wouldn't it? I mean, if the soldiers were charging, there was a mud brick wall up there. Even with that mud brick wall gone, I mean, what are they supposed to do? I mean, climb up the wall to attack. So what Kenyon's report says is that mud brick wall collapsed off of this foundation, and it went all the way up to the top of the rim there, and it formed a ramp like this so that when the charging army would come, they could have run up into the city to attack it.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what the Bible says. Each man went before him straight up into the city, and they could do that by just climbing up over that pile of collapsed mud bricks, up over the top of the stone retaining wall, up the embankment, and into the city.
Joshua 6:24 then tells us that the Israelites burned the whole city and everything in it. To understand what a burned city would look like in Etel, let's return for a moment to our cake analogy. This chocolate layer represents a city that was destroyed by fire. Ooh! A burned layer stands out from the other layers of a cake, just as a burned city stands out when Etel is excavated. Now, just as we can remove a slice from a cake to expose the inner structure of the cake, the same thing is true for Etel. As this trench was dug, this burn layer that you see right here was exposed.
When Kathleen Kenyon came in the 1950s, she opened up actually 5 squares in this area to kind of check Garstang's findings to see if she came up with the same results he found, because he found evidence for a massive destruction by fire. And he, of course, equated that to the biblical account, because the Bible says the Israelites charged up into the city and then they set it on fire. So she opened up these squares, and she found exactly the same sequence that Garstang had found. Vast destruction layer, about 3 feet thick of destruction debris, ash, collapsed roof timbers, and all kinds of things.
Now in this burn layer, both Garstang and Kenyon found room after room of large storage jars that were full of grain, and all of it was burned.
Now this is a very unusual find, because grain was valuable. Why would you leave it to be burned up?
Joshua 6:18 tells us that while destroying Jericho, the Israelites were commanded to keep away from the devoted things.
Just the very fact that the grain was left to be destroyed in the fire tells us also that the Israelites obeyed God's command not to plunder the city. So when the archaeologists excavated at Jericho, did they find evidence that matched that text or not? Well, yes, they did. They found that it was fortified, as the Bible says. We found that the walls fell down, as the Bible describes. This happened at harvest time, as the Bible describes. The city was burned, as the Bible described. You would not know those details. It had to be somebody who was there and witnessed these events and recorded it at the time. An eyewitness account. That's the only answer. There's no other answer. So I think we have to take the Bible literally.
And we came up to a break in the rocks, and I looked over from the north looking due south, and both of us were just stunned. From a distance, it's big. When you're close to it, it is enormous. It's 4 stories tall. And I've often said that the miracle that would have happened there probably rivaled or surpassed the crossing of the Red Sea.
The Exodus account says that the people of Israel grumbled against Moses, saying, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?"
Your tongue feels like a piece of tar from a Texas highway when you're out in the desert. The sun is relentless. They would have cried out for water. And of course Moses heard their cries, petitioned God. Moses struck the rock and it split right down the middle from top to bottom. The Bible literally says the water gushed from this.
I climbed up the backside to the very base of this rock, and right at the base of that split, it's deeply gouged, and the rock on either side, if you look straight up from the inside of that rock, it's really, really smooth, but it's pressure flaked. Big chunks of granite have been flaked from the bottom, and it's not a normal erosive pattern for granite. Granite generally from just wind and erosion will crack and flake off from the top down. This is coming up as though something came flying up and really gouged the rock. When that rock was split into, a geyser erupted out of the top of it. It blew those 2 pieces of that rock apart.
It's very interesting. This part of the world gets a ½ inch of rain every 10 years. It's so arid and so dry. Yet this rock shows distinct evidence of water erosion. Not just a trickle, a burst of water flowing from it, washing out the whole mountainside, going down and washing all the sand that's down below it, creating an ancient lake bed down below.
Now you're talking about anywhere from 600,000 to estimates of up to 2 million people that came out of Egypt. If we were talking about a tiny little rock with a tiny little trickle, they would still be in line waiting to get a sip of that water. This place would have filled with water so quickly that that entire group of people could have come around the edges of this 2 or 3 mile long area and immediately taken their fill of water.
It's very compelling. If you were to show the picture to somebody and say, well, it came from Colorado or Utah, well, you'd accept that. But if you say this came from one of the most arid places in the world, where there are no rivers.
The most graphic description would be found in Psalms. Thou didst cleave the rock in the wilderness, and the waters ran down as rivers.
But you know, what I found was, in my life, the Bible is like a time machine. It goes before history started, when the universe was still being created. It is prehistory, before the flood, in other words. You've got the present history from the flood up to the present moment. You've got the present, and then it goes on into the future. And a lot of us understand where we stand right now. We're at the end of an age. Not the end of the world, the end of an age. It's wrongly put that way. The Bible also shows man's relationship to man, which, as you know, hasn't been very good. I mean, if you look down through the history of the world, these men who've been appointed kings and dictators, whatever they have, going right the way back to Nineveh and into Egypt and Babylon, etc., were pretty big monsters, and they killed people with alacrity. They didn't have a problem with it. And then it also talks about and improves man's relationship to God, which also hasn't been good. We call him Yahweh. There have been very brilliant men who've written various things, like Pharaoh Fenton, and he found the rhythm and meter in the Bible. He translated the Bible into the Pharaoh Fenton version. It's used as a reference Bible. And how about the scientific proofs? You've got science, biology, the chemical nature of life, which I want to quickly cover now, because I've got a very limited time to do all this in. Panin, who's an atheist, found the numerology of the Bible. You realise that all those verses in the Bible written in the Hebrew also balance to rhythm 7s and 13s? And when you go into this, you are absolutely staggered. Do you know that the very first verse in the Bible, in the numerology in the Hebrew, proves pi? That's 2207, showing the world is round. The very first verse of that shows that. And of course, various portions of the Bible show that as well, show the world is round. When you look up in the heavens, you look up and you see that the moon is round, the sun is round, everything else is round. So why would the Pope say to Galileo, recant, otherwise I'll chop your head off? It was a political statement. He didn't get the information from the Bible. It was about the feudal system and the terrible conditions the serfs lived under, and they wanted to get out of that situation. And, you know, it was almost in a revolt situation, I'm sure, because they were treated very badly by these lords and barons, etc. And the lords and barons said, look, if these people think the world is round, they're all going to march off our land, and we won't have anybody to do all our work for us. Then you have the pyramid. You've got the pyramid which is in stone at Giza. It's a Bible in stone. If you look up in the heavens, you've got all the constellations. If you look at the planets in the constellations and what the constellations are structured like the bull, etc., you'll find that these represent symbols in the Bible, and that the names of the various suns in there represent words which describe the Bible story. So there's the Bible up in the heavens. So when the Bible keeps on saying, look up, you can see it. If you look at Psalm 19, you can also see it. All over the Bible, it tells you to do this. The Bible also covers earth scientists, so wherever it touches on it, it is accurate. It's got ocean currents, and that's how we started to navigate around the planet. Using the correct triangular right, instead of going from Plymouth to America, which took 6, 7 months, 8 months, and everybody's half dead by the time they got there. Most were dead. You have the hydrological cycle, which came to us from the Bible, describing how the rain works and how it evaporates off the surface of the ocean. You have the diffusion of light by Sir Isaac Newton. Now, he was 2/3 of his life he spent studying the Bible. And he got that information from the Bible in the book of Job. That's how he found diffusion of light, and probably a lot of other stuff. You've got apt descriptions of atomic bombs and the reaction and what happens to people when one goes off. But also, the light structure of an atomic bomb is described in the Bible very accurately. You've got the universe. You've got proportion between sun, moon, and earth. Do you realize the proportion of the moon to the earth is exactly the proportion of the head of a man to his body? And then, of course, you've got the proportion between the earth, the moon, and the sun, which enables to have the these blackening of the suns every so often. You've got the golden proportion. As I've said, you've already got pi in the first verse of the Bible. I'm showing the planets behind you. Often must wonder how they stay in their tracks. You've got, at the present moment, undersea cities, like Herculean, but they're all over, off India, and you find roads under the Mediterranean now. We're just looking, we're finding settlements off northern Britain. You know what? The Bible tells us those things there, because they were buried in the flood, and the flood hasn't gone back yet. And all those huge areas around Britain are still covered. One day they won't be. Conclusion, we have just been able to cover just a few items here, and I would like to encourage you to help strengthen your faith and understanding the Bible, because when I went to the churches, it was exactly that. They could tell me nothing, couldn't help me. They weren't even students of the Bible, they told me, which shook me.
By engaging in the worst identity theft in all human history, they effectively scratched out the holy name of Yahweh and replaced it with the satanic word Elohim, translated God, and Adonai, translated Lord. And that's not all they did. They've also tactfully mistranslated words, Hebrew words, to purposely give the impression that Yahweh is just another God. But the word God or Elohim was never used in the original manuscripts to describe Yahweh. That's the key. Okay?
Way of proving that he is the creator. What he does is he reveals the future events through his prophets well in advance, sometimes thousands of years before they happen. So many things he thus revealed regarding the kingdoms and personalities have already come to pass. 1/3 of his words written in the Holy Bible are prophecies. According to Yahweh, he says these things in advance to prove that he is the only true God, who knows how things will play out toward the end, while all others cannot. He goes on to say that if he didn't proclaim what he was going to accomplish, when things happen, someone may boast that their idols did it.